My name is Chris Sear, and I'm an associate research scientist at OCLC Research. A lot of my current work centers around the broader impact of the library in the community, and my background is in international relations, so needless to say, the SDGs are a topic near and dear to my heart. This past fall, we conducted a survey of librarians on the work that they are doing to further the SDGs. Before we get into the key findings, I want to give a few statistics about the dissemination of the survey because it was a big success. We had over 1,700 responses in total, which was actually quite a bit more than we initially had in our goal. About two-thirds were from the Americas region, a quarter were from the EMEA region, and just under a tenth were from the Asia Pacific region. 16 countries represent the Americas region, and the majority of the responses we got from this region were from the United States and from Canada. The EMEA region is made up of 63 countries, and the largest groups of respondents in this region were from Italy and Germany. The Asia Pacific region is made up of 20 countries, and most of the responses came from either Taiwan, Australia, or the Philippines. And we had a pretty good breakdown in terms of library type. About half of respondents were from academic or educational libraries. Within that, most of them, about 43% of total respondents, were from either college, university, or research libraries. About 4% were from community college libraries. 3% were from school, kindergarten through 12th grade libraries. And then about 1% were from other educational libraries. And then about 31% of total respondents were from public libraries, with another 19% from other types of libraries. Now, I want to get into some of the key findings from the survey. For the survey, we were interested in specific activities that libraries are doing to the five SDGs that were mentioned previously, where some of our research showed that we believe libraries can have the biggest impact. The goals were quality education, reduced inequality, peace, justice, and strong institutions, decent work and economic growth, and working in partnership to achieve the goals. And we asked about specific activities around each of these. We were also interested in understanding more about library awareness of the SDGs and their incorporation into library strategic planning. We also had an open-ended section of the survey where respondents could put in their own comments. On this slide, I want to highlight several different comments that came up in this section because they demonstrate one of the major themes of the survey, which is that whether explicitly or implicitly, libraries provide extensive support for the SDGs. The first quote that I have on here comes from an academic librarian in the United States who said, quote, "Libraries model sustainability. We are inclusive, shared infrastructure that reduce the need for individual broader consumption." And there are a few things that really stand out to me about this quote. First, I like the idea of shared infrastructure, which can greatly increase efficiency and reduce consumption. And I think this is interesting because there can be shared infrastructure on several levels. First of all, individual libraries can provide shared infrastructure for the communities that they serve. Quite simply, a book that a library purchases once can be used by several people and save them the need from all purchasing it. But you could also think at the broader level about shared infrastructure among libraries. Through collaborative arrangements like consortia, libraries can greatly increase the efficiency of the system as a whole. The second quote that we have on this slide talks about this broader infrastructure in more detail, and it comes from an academic librarian in Australia who said, quote, "Libraries can play a role in providing the infrastructure to facilitate innovation. For example, research data stores, institutional repositories, archives, etc." Going back to that first quote from the US academic librarian, another part that I think was really interesting about it is that they mentioned inclusivity. This is something that came up a lot in the surveys. For example, another quote on this slide from a French academic librarian said, quote, "Libraries are places of tolerance, openness, and diversity. They have all the assets to go forward in this direction and to be an active actor of change." A US public librarian also talked about this theme of openness, saying that the library, quote, is in a unique position to coordinate services and build networks across the community through information distribution, community partnerships, and community leadership. In both of these quotes, we can see the theme of the reach that the library has to a huge portion in their community, one that is virtually unparalleled among both public and private institutions. Great. Well, we asked libraries how they first learned about the SDGs, and we found that OCLC and IFLA were the two most prevalent ways that library staff learned about them. About a quarter learned about the SDGs from OCLC, and a quarter from IFLA. About a fifth of them learned from news sources. The United Nations was at around 18%. About 17% found out about them from a conference or other event, and then about 16% learned about them from a colleague. We then asked respondents, to what degree, if any, has your library incorporated the SDGs into strategic planning? And I thought the findings from this were pretty interesting. While fewer than a tenth of total respondents explicitly referenced the SDGs in their strategic plans, about 30% did consider the SDGs as part of their strategic planning efforts, even if they did not explicitly reference them. About 41% of respondents have not incorporated the SDGs in, and about a quarter of respondents were not sure whether or not they did it. One thing that I was really interested in learning about from this question was the extent to which the incorporation of the SDGs into strategic planning has an impact on library activities towards the SDGs. The big reason I was interested in this is because a lot of the SDGs deal with things that libraries were doing long before the SDGs. And so I was interested in learning more about the specific impact of the SDGs. We asked respondents about a total of 35 activities towards the five SDGs that were mentioned earlier. And on this slide, we can see how many the respondents did on average based on their level of incorporation of the SDGs into strategic planning. For academic libraries, we can see that those who explicitly referenced the SDGs on average did more than other types of respondents. So on average, they did about 13 of the activities. Those who did not explicitly reference them, but did consider them as part of their planning, did about 11 of them on average. And those who did not incorporate them did a little under 10 of the activities regularly on average. For public libraries, there is a similar story, although the impact doesn't appear to be quite as strong. Public libraries that either explicitly referenced or considered the SDGs as part of their strategic planning did a little over 11 of the 35 activities on average, while those that did not incorporate them did a little under 10 of them regularly. So I think that this shows that the SDGs do appear to have an impact on what libraries do. But even when they don't deliberately do it to support the SDGs, libraries are still doing a lot of work to further them. We asked respondents, of the five SDGs that were identified, please rank them in terms of how you think which ones libraries can have the greatest impact on. Across regions and library types, quality education, SDG 4, was by far ranked the highest, on average receiving a score of 4.52 out of 5. Reduced inequalities, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and decent economic work or decent work and economic growth were all a bit below that, with partnership for the goals having the lowest average rank of any of the ones that we asked about. I don't think it's surprising that quality education was the top one that respondents selected, and the comments underscored the role of libraries in education. On this slide, we have a quote from a Canadian public librarian who said, quote, "The public library is the cornerstone of equal access to education and learning in any community. We work with our communities to offer free and relevant programming and collections that meet our community needs." One thing that I really like about this quote is that it discusses education in terms of the community needs and working to meet them. And these needs can differ for any library just depending on the specific community that it serves. The second highest ranked goal was SDG 10, which is reduced inequality. Here can see some interesting differences by region. Public library respondents in the Americas tend to do more activities related to reduced inequalities than public libraries in either the APAC or EMEA region. Among academic library respondents in both the Americas and the APAC region, we do see on average that they do more activities relating to reduced inequalities than in the EMEA region. And so I think this is an interesting comparison because it shows that different types of libraries and libraries in different parts of the world can sometimes prioritize the goals a little bit differently just based on those specific needs of their community. Okay, so we do have another survey. Based on all of this, we were interested in hearing how your library plans to address reduced inequalities. Um, so let's take a look and see if the link works.
It is working now. I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me 1 second.
That sounds great. And so the choices that we have for activities to reduce inequalities are collections, communication and signage, facilities, partnerships, policies and procedures, programming, and staff training. And I'd be very interested in seeing which ones are the primary ones. Oh, and it looks like right now policies and procedures seems to be the top one, although staff training. So and then collections also are a big one. Yeah, I think that's great, especially with the policies and procedures, because I think that's showing that this is something where really libraries are thinking about it in terms of strategic planning, which is very encouraging to hear. Collections also looks like about 21% of people right now are looking at that as one of the big ways to address reduced inequalities. And I can definitely see that, libraries putting a lot of effort into diversity of collections and things like that. Um, Looks like communications and signage right now seems to be the lowest one, but staff training and programming both have about 15% each. So yeah, I think there's a lot of great work that libraries are doing for this. And I think this is interesting because it shows that there are so many different ways to reduce inequalities. Now I want to get into some country-specific discussion. On this slide, we have the number of respondents for countries in the EMEA region where we had more than 10 respondents each. As you can see, Italy was the top one and Germany was the second. And in both of these countries, we had enough respondents that we can make comparisons with how they fit with the rest of the world. On this slide, we have a chart that looks at how Italian academic libraries compare with all other academic libraries in terms of how often they collaborate with community agencies to provide instruction, classes, and courses for their community. And this is an activity that you can think of as both supporting goal 4, which is quality education, and then goal 17, which is partnership to achieve the goals. In both cases, we can see about 39% of academic libraries do it regularly. However, in Italy, 52% of academic libraries do this on occasion, and only 9% have never done it. And you can contrast this with the rest of the world, where 40% of academic libraries do it on occasion, and 20% either have never done it or no longer do it. So I think this is interesting talking about the specific needs of the community, that this is something that does appear to be a pretty big priority in Italy. In Germany, I thought there was an interesting comparison in terms of public libraries. In Germany, almost three-quarters of public libraries either regularly or occasionally implement policies to ensure diverse staffing and leadership, which is to support the goal of reduced inequalities. In the rest of the world, this is done by just over half of the libraries. So this does appear to be something that is done more frequently in Germany. Now that we've gone over some of the numbers, I want to end with a few quotes from the open-ended section of the survey, because I think they do a great job of showing the broader role of the library in the community ecosystem. The first one comes from an Italian public librarian who said, quote, "We have library points all around the town, also in shops, malls, and other public spaces where people can meet, in quotes, the library without visiting it." And I love this idea of meeting the library uh, where people are rather than having it just be kind of a single building that people go to. Because I think it demonstrates this broader theme that the library is something that's all around us. It's not just necessarily one place. In addition to meeting users where they are, the library also meets users based on their particular needs. One Puerto Rican academic librarian told us that their institution, quote, has staff such as counselors, nurses who work in collaboration with other agencies of public and private community. They use the library facilities to carry them out. An academic librarian in the United States echoed this sentiment, saying that their library is, quote, a jack of all trades. If we can find a way to help, we will. Libraries have also worked hard to serve populations that might be underserved by other public institutions. For example, one Greek public librarian mentioned that they have a mobile library at refugee camps. So you want a good example of meeting users where they are based on particular needs. In my opinion, that's a really, really good one. Libraries have also been working to better serve diverse communities. One US public librarian told us, quote, "We have formed an equity, diversity, and inclusion task force that is taking a close look at our collections, buildings, programs, services, policies, and hiring practices through an EDI lens and making changes where necessary." So, one thing that really stands out to me about this quote is that last part where they talk about making changes where necessary, because it shows that they're looking at the library as this constantly evolving and improving institution, and always looking for ways that they can do their work better. And lastly, I want to highlight a quote that talks about why libraries are such good partners for the SDGs. One public librarian in the United States told us, quote, "The library serves as an amplifier and connector in the community it serves," end quote. In my opinion, it's impossible to underestimate these connections. In several of the projects that we've done here at OCLC Research in the past few years, we've seen this incredible reach that libraries have to members of their community. The project I'm really thinking of right now is the public libraries responding to the opioid crisis, where we really saw that libraries had relationships with members of the community who sometimes had a tendency to avoid other public agencies. These findings are just the beginning of looking into this survey data. There is a lot there, and a lot of really interesting things. So we'll be reporting out these results over the next year, and I would encourage you to keep an eye out for it. The results have also led us to start thinking more about the broader impact that the library has in a larger social, economic, and information ecosystem. So stay tuned because I think there's going to be a lot more research coming out on that. And with that, I'd love to hear any questions or thoughts that you have. So feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to reach out to me directly, on this slide, I have my email address and my Twitter handle. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come to this talk. And I'm very happy you're here.
Thank you so much, Chris, for this wonderful presentation. I really like the examples you gave. For instance, the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, but you can just start at your own library and start to interact with your patrons. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Please do put your comments and questions in the chat. And then I'd like to give the floor to Giuseppe Vitello.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for having invited me. I'm very thrilled that I can present in this session the BLEED activities on sustainable development goals. In fact, perhaps just a short introduction of BLEED. BLEED stands for European Bureau of Library Information and Documentation Associations. And it was born in 1992. So together with LIBER is especially focused on academic libraries. We are perhaps the oldest organization, library organization active at European level. In fact, EBLIDA, when it started, it was mainly an organization for lobbying. We wanted, that time in 1992, there was a big problem with the directive, a newly approved directive, which was a directive on lending rights. It was the very first time that this would become a European standard. So we lobbied for that. And of course, then it has always been the same. We lobbied for the first European directive on copyright in the information society, then for the second European directive on lending rights, and also of course, 2 years ago, we lobbied for the European directive on copyright in the digital single market. You know, sometimes you have also to look back. I don't know whether you have ever tried to sit on the seat, you know, which is facing the direction of the train. Then the landscape, you know, is running over you. So it's although it is fastidious for some people, I very often like actually to sit on a seat that is going the opposite direction of the train. And why this? Because you have a broader picture and you can really focus on details. And in fact, it's what we did. What you find here on the screen is the EBLIDA Annual Council, which is the most important body. So it's what we did, and we said, but let's look back. I mean, now every organization in Europe is dealing with copyright. Copyright has become so pervasive that there is no need really to have a single organization exclusively focused on copyright. And also lobbying. Every organization is lobbying actually for its own projects in Brussels. And so this is that was the moment, and that was in June 2019 that we shifted to a strategy, and the strategy was essentially based on sustainable development. And we came also with the, in fact, we published this report. This report is published in 4 versions, and it has also been translated in 6 languages so far. Perhaps not the full report, but parts of it. And well, the report has a very general title, Think the Unthinkable. But but I prefer actually to focus on this boring subtitle, because it says really what is our program: a post-COVID-19 library agenda, meeting sustainable development goals, and this library agenda, meeting sustainable development goals, should be funded through European structural and investment funds from 2021 to 2027. So it's a real program actually, and we are. I will now expand upon every single piece of this program. So the post-COVID-19 library agenda, do we need it? In fact, what we found out is that during the lockdown, there was this narrative, okay, that libraries were closed. Indeed, libraries were closed. The main door was closed, but in the kitchen, let's say in the back of the library, of many libraries, there was a fast and impetuous development of of the library, and this was going in 2 directions. The first was the development of the digital library, and the second was the socially inclusive library. We released a report in May 2020, and now the report is being updated. And in fact, I've already collected some answers. Our reports are going to library associations, which are our full members, and so they prepare answers. And in fact, there was this the development of the socially inclusive library. And what does it mean? It means that, for instance, there was, of course, the development of the digital library with many free of charge educational resources, open access educational resources, or licensed under the Creative Commons license. There were laptops that were, we found out examples of laptops that were going to students in vulnerable conditions. There were also, that was extremely interesting, there were some libraries like in Lithuania, like to a lesser extent in France and Portugal, which were producing face masks, and face masks through 3D printers. And of course, together with these quite advanced services, librarians were striving to reach their users in traditional way, through telephone calls, through or through books, which were reaching users together, very often together with the food. So these are examples that all really meet sustainable development goals. And in fact, if I look at the examples that I'm collecting now on the post-COVID, I find that all these activities can be framed into one or the other SDG. Okay, so Sustainable Development Goals is now our main priority. And you may have heard, and actually it was reflected in the poll that Chris launched, that IFLA, in fact, has played a big role in that. And we are all grateful to IFLA because they were fighting in order to, let's say, to put libraries, get libraries involved into this in the behavior, into this program, these United Nations programs, and also to enhance the role of and the statute of access to information. Access to information is a specific goal. It's a goal 16 and target 10. Nevertheless, I mean, as a bleeder, we have a different approach. We take a different approach in relation to IFLA. Why this? First of all, our approach is European. You may say, well, but why? I mean, there is one program, United Nations, and then there are with 17 SDGs, 169 targets, and 232 indicators. So what is changing? Well, everything is changing indeed, because there are some continents or countries that consider that they are quite advanced in the attainment of SDGs. And this is actually the case of Europe. For instance, if you look at indicators, then you go to Eurostat. Eurostat is, as you know, the statistics for the European Union, the Office of Statistics, and you found out that actually they don't have 232 indicators. They don't maintain 232 indicators, but only 100. Only 100 because they consider that these are the most important. Another example, and I give you actually two examples. One is SDG 2, which is, as you know, no hunger. Well, I mean, of course, the COVID crisis has created a situation or situations of poverty, and actually this is becoming a problem. But before the COVID crisis, actually, programs in Europe were not designed to fight hunger, but they were designed to fight obesity. So it's exactly the other way around. And also the other example is exactly SDG 16 target 10. It's access to information. Every librarian considered that every librarian would say, this is my goal. It's access to information. But in fact, as the design of the, and you would expect, of course, that in this access to information, there would be included things like fight to fake news or better access to information. But in fact, when you focus on indicators, then you found out that it's the number of journalists that are killed, or the number of websites, public websites that make available information. So we are in a totally different landscape. In Europe, God thanks, we do not have journalists, or I mean, it's a very rare occasion. We don't have journalists that are killed or are tortured. And in Europe, practically all information, all agencies, governmental agencies, make available information on the website. So there is a need, there is a clear focus on the European approach, and this is pushed by BLIDA. Another thing, as you know, IFLA is calling for stories, and they have created this beautiful this beautiful tool, which is the IFRA library map of the world, and they put some stories or some meaningful stories. Many library organizations or many associations have created websites. And if you look at France, for instance, you won't find less than 500 stories that are told on the website. So, in fact, we think that there is one step further that can be taken. And the step is policies, and it is policy which is assessed through indicators. And why the issue of indicators is so important? It is important because when you go to a governmental official, they want to know, okay, fine, you are doing a wonderful job, that's perfect. But to what extent is your action really making progress, really making a contribution to the attainment of SDGs? And this is something that is has to be quantified, and this is why there are also indicators. So, and for this, I mean, we have created our own tools, and the main tool is the EBLIDA Sustainable Development House, which enables administrators, library administrators, but we hope also to reach national or local level administrator, which in a way or another are dealing with libraries, in a sort of advocacy from below, let's say. And the main tool is called the EBLIDA Matrix. And in fact, I will explain to you, but you can do, I mean, you can take your phone, your smartphone, and you type on the Google search box EBLIDA Matrix, and you immediately fall into the EBLIDA Matrix. So there are, if you want to undertake, and that's really the result of our investigation, we authored last year the first European report on sustainable development and European libraries. If you want to start an SDG-oriented library project, we feel that you have to get rid of 4 false myths. The very first false myth is the fact that, okay, you have a library mission, that is, you know, book transaction, and you have SDGs. And SDGs are nice things, but not really part of the core mission of the library. It's a kind of accessory to the library. Well, I would say, and this really has matured up in the last 2 years when we sent a report, collected answers, and also in the discussions with experts. Then actually the sustainable development is now becoming a new framework for libraries. Libraries work within a cultural framework, within an educational framework, but sustainable development wraps them all, and so it's very important. Another false myth is that SDGs are mainly focused on environment. Okay, this I would call it as an unintended effect of Greta Thunberg, because she advocated for environment in the extraordinary way we know, but in fact SDGs is not at all only about environment. There are, and I think Chris rightly emphasized it, there are 3 pillars actually: environment, social pillar, and then the economic pillar. And of course SDGs like 10, like 11, well, they all deal about socio-economic trends. The third false myth concerns the fact that for many people, SDGs is more a matter of macro policies, fiscal and legislative, and not of micro policies. And the libraries would be, of course, carrying out micro policies. Of course, this is partly true. I mean, if you put a tax on fuel, let's say, then you may incentivize in this way the acquisitions of electric cars. I mean, this is very obvious. The problem is another, that if you put a tax on fuel, then you may very likely find people protesting or really getting to the street. And I would like to remember that you may have followed in the past this movement of yellow jackets, of yellow vests, and you remember that actually the reason why all this originated was that there was a tax on fuel. So it's not only a matter of micro policies in this kind, it's also a matter of lifestyle. And this is where libraries really can give an important contribution. And then the last false myth is that SDG projects are small scale, they are local, and they have mainly a demonstrative nature. Well, it may be true, but in fact, you see that if you accumulate demonstrative projects, that creates a policy. I would like really to give the example of the Spanish Library Association. They have prioritized SDG 5, and they consider that library should be a safe place for women, a safe place for LGBT minorities, and so on. So this is a real policy, you see. I'm going, I think that I have some time, so I'm going. So what does EBLIDA offer? We are offering, as you say, as I mentioned, we have a SDG European house with a community. We are offering services, we have tools, and we are also offering some training. Not quite developed, but still. The community is, of course, our association, are the library associations and institutions that are members of EBLIDA, and they are more than 100, almost 120, and we cover 34 countries. But it's not only the annual council or this, let's say, official body, EBLIDA body. It is also the fact that there is an expert group which is really supporting us. And in particular, I mean, we started, it's ELSIA, which stands for European Library Sustainable Development in Implementation and Assessment. At the beginning, it was an ELSA expert group. It was only about assessment because we considered that the issue of evaluation was very, very important. But then, I mean, the activities went so quickly and were so successful that actually we had some more members. In fact, in the last, this year, after 4 months, we have already increased by 10% our membership. If you want to join EBLIDA, there are 2 levels. There are the full members, and these are the library associations. And then there is the level of library institutions and the association. This is the fee that is requested to associate EBLIDA. Services offered by EBLIDA, they are mainly this Think the Unthinkable report, which is, of course, available on our website. And it's the section publications. So it is a report. We released it in September 2020, but it is, in addition to that, is also a strategy. And why is it a strategy? Because we are offering a kind of a consultancy service to our members. We have started a whole strategy of Think the Unthinkable workshops. There were 3 workshops last year at European level. And then we are now going to nations, France, Netherlands, Latvia, Greece, Bulgaria, Italy at the end of this month, Spain, and more workshops are in the pipeline. So why these workshops? What do we during the workshop, really, we help to transfer our competencies about SDGs and about also structural funds. We try to facilitate exchange of best practices, and I would strongly really recommend you to come to the EBLIDA conference, which is taking place on 11th June in the afternoon. It will be online, where all these projects actually will introduce themselves, but there will also be an opportunity to exchange best practices, in particular on how to access these funds, the European Structural Investment Funds. And then we are also helping in the internationalization of national projects. EBLIDA is also providing tools, and I already mentioned the EBLIDA matrix. The EBLIDA matrix is, again, I mean, just use your smartphone, type EBLIDA matrix, and you would come into this tool. For each SDG, you find the following sections. You find a section dealing with European Union programs which are designed to support SDGs, so a selection of EU programs that are designed. And of course, there are these famous programs which are quite familiar to librarians, like Horizon, like Erasmus, but there are plenty of European Union programs. Is that because you should present a project within these programs? Not really, actually, but it is important that you know that there is an action because undertaken by the European Union, because then it reflects on your territory. on your local community. The second section concerns library policies, which are covering, library policies covering each of SDGs. For each of the SDGs, you will find policies when it is the case, like in Spain, for instance, like in Latvia, like in France. They managed actually to go to the highest level because libraries are included. I'm talking about France, Latvia, because they are included now in the national roadmaps, in the SDG national roadmaps. So there is a high status for libraries. And then the other two sessions are about indicators. I'm not going to deal because indicators is a very thorny issue, and I would really need another presentation in order to explain what evaluation is. We have also, for those who are interested, we have also created the SDG KIC, Knowledge and Information Center. And here, where the EBLIDA matrix works on a horizontal way, the SDG KIC works vertically. Country by country, you can see the projects. You can see also the development of this workshop, because our idea is that at the end of the day, there will be as many projects filed for structural funds as possible. And here I come to the training session. We are preparing European Structural Investment Funds 2021-2027, a guide for library applicants. And this guide will be presented exactly on 11th June when there is the EBLIDA conference. So it's a little bit of training. We may also plan a summer school, but okay, we'll see. I would like to emphasize why we selected the European Structural Investment Funds. You know that LIBER, the organization who's working with academic libraries, is very much involved in the Horizon program. You know that the Public Libraries 2030 is very much involved in the Democracy program. So each organization which is active, a library organization which is active at European level, more or less, let's say, adopt a program, and they really try to work with not only with EC officials, but actually to create networks within this program. We have selected European Structural Investment Funds for the following reason. Because in the European Union program, there is always a requirement, an R&D requirement in projects. You must be a research, but you must find some research because, of course, there are these projects that are funded by the European Union. They are pioneering. But we know very well that only libraries which are big and well-tooled, they can afford this move. And so European structural funds is in fact for the, let's say, average library, is for the public library in a community, in a commune, in a municipality, and which is not really a research agency. Then another thing, and this is really in the seminar that was very, very interesting, because the programs, I mean, the structural funds have a very interesting but also complicated mechanism, because it's money that is given from member states to the European Union, and then they come back to member states for strategic development, for economic or social strategies which are linked with local development. And so, in fact, very often the librarian does not have to set up a complex network and go to Brussels and try to understand what. Actually, if they need a contact, they may very likely find this contact next door. It will be the department in your municipality, for instance, which is dealing with these particular funds. It will maybe a department in your own university which is dealing with these particular funds. Then, so local communities, and then of course. I would say that the structural funds, it may seem quite down to ground, but this is a huge mass of money. It is the richest fund of the European Union. Normally, it accounts for 1/3 of the whole European Union budget. So there is plenty of money that used to be allocated for infrastructure, but then the European Union soon realized that. If you can build up a wonderful motorway or a wonderful cities, but if people do not live in these cities or do not use motorways, it's wasted money. So there are plenty of, there is an attention also to the persons, let's say, in spite of this idea that the populist party says that the European Union is full of technocrats who do not understand the needs of the people. I would like just to say why we also are convinced that libraries should really mobilize in order to have access to these funds. I mean, these figures are not easily comparable. I'm fully aware that it's not the right way. It's not very scientific, let's say. But we don't know. We don't know how much investment the European Union is, how much the European Union is investing on libraries. In the 90s, there was a report, and you can find out that for every euro that was invested by the European Union, there were something like 2,500 euro that were spent by national governments. And I compared actually this figure with the ratio between the European Union investment on culture and the national investment on culture. And you see that actually the ratio is totally different. It's 1 to 334. Of course, I should, we don't have actually figures. It's a pity. Maybe EBLIDA will work on that. But it's just to say that when you are claiming that libraries are underfunded, the only thing is that if the library should become important for the European Union, they should become structurally important for the European Union. So this is the kind of advocacy that we carry out. This is also the way in which Think the Unthinkable comes true. And I attended this morning a seminar in Latvia, which was the seminar of Think the Unthinkable seminar in Latvia. And they changed the title, and that's a very good move. They called it Do the Unthinkable. So I hope that in the future we can start to implement unthinkable things, but that may become true sooner or later. And I would like to thank you for your attention. If you wish to contact me, this is my email, and I'm open to respond to answer all questions.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe. And thank you also, Chris, for your great presentation and the great insights that you both gave us. At this point, I would like to ask the audience to enter any questions they have in the chat. There's already one question. Was it possible to establish why libraries in Africa and South Africa did not participate in the research? Maybe this is one for Chris.
Yeah, so we did have libraries in Africa and South Africa that participated in it. The chart that I showed, basically because there were 63 countries in the EMEA region, and so it was a bit impractical to put all of them on one chart. So I cut it off at ones that had 10 or more respondents. But we did have, off the top of my head, I know South Africa, we had some respondents. Morocco, we had some respondents, but it was just under 10. So they were not on that chart.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? You can put it in the chat and I will read it to our speakers.
Yeah, please allow me in the meantime to focus your attention on a website that Nathalie Scardoso brought up, libraryscience.de, which is also a useful tool to measure where you're standing regarding the Sustainable Development Goals. And while you key in your question in the chat, I'd like to ask Giuseppe. You gave a wonderful presentation with great insight in the European infrastructure for libraries and what the possibilities are. Suppose I'm just a librarian in quite a small library. What would you recommend me to do? Where can I start working on SDGs?
Two things. The first is to use these tools, because actually they help you to define projects, then to put these projects into the wider framework of the Agenda 2030. So now I'm advertising, let's say, EBLIDA tools. But then the easiest thing you could do is actually to call the responsible for structural funds or for European funds within your university, and I'm sure it exists, or within your municipality or within your province. Frankly, every state has, of course, its own administrative. And then say, please tell me, what do you want to achieve with this structural money, with this money? What kind of development strategy you want to promote? And in fact, you may find out that actually the library can participate in these structural funds. I'll give you an example. I'm particularly fond of Latvians because really they have worked very seriously on this. And they organized a seminar, and there were officials from the Ministry of Culture and Education, but there was also an official from the, I think, Ministry of European Policy or something, and or local. And he said, listen, for smaller libraries, we want to create a one-shop window for information. And if you do projects of this kind, then we are going to fund it. I mean, I found that that was
okay. Yeah, thank you so much. So we should check your website, find these examples there, and use the toolkit EBLIDA offers.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any questions in the chat in the meantime? We also
don't see any other questions. And in that case, I would like to invite you, Matthijs, to close the session. And
yeah, I would say so. It's 3 o'clock. So let me just say, thank you very much for joining our session. Please stay connected. We can build this partnership. We are this global community. Please check this link, oc.lc/mail, so you can keep updated of everything that's happening within OCLC and OCLC activities in the future. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much to our speakers of today. And I hope I'll see you back again at another OCLC activity, either in the EMEARC21 or in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having invited me.
Thank you.